Broadway performers, the local symphony, and an acclaimed homegrown historian come together for a sprawling multimedia production about World War II. Here to discuss it, we're joined via video by the project's creator, John Monsky, writer, executive producer, and narrator of the American History Unbound series. Good morning, John.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. We're also joined here in studio by Kymberly Wolfson, uh, event co-chair and also board member of the Wolfson Family Foundation. Good morning, Kymberly.
Good morning, Ann.
So, John, this is a project that you're performing in Jacksonville, but it's just one of several epic productions that you've created, including about the Vietnam War, going to the moon, the Great War, and the Great Gatsby. Tell us a little bit about The Eyes of the World, this production from D-Day to VE Day. What is the animating idea behind it? What's the story you're telling?
Well, all these productions have a story and an arc to them. This one is this starts with really four figures, and it's a story of Ernest Hemingway, J.D. Salinger, Robert Capa, the famous war photographer, and Lee Miller, the famous fashion model who became a war photographer. And it turns out all four of these figures were connected and were friends, and we see the momentous effort of the United States Army from D-Day to VE Day in Europe through their eyes. And it's an incredible story between the way the war affected them, what they saw. That's why we call it Eyes of the World. It's the war through their eyes. Also, that's a famous line from Eisenhower's words that he gave to the troops, "The eyes of the world are upon you." So it's a kind of dramatic event, and it's filled with a lot of elements.
Yeah, and this is something that you've performed at Carnegie Hall, at the Kennedy Center, at Symphony Hall in Boston. And so I know people are very excited to have it here in Jacksonville, but it is a stage full of elements. Like you said, I mean, there is the kind of film element, there's photographs, there's sound that is pulled from historical events. There's also Broadway vocalists. There are an entire symphony orchestra on stage. And then you are narrating this event. Can you tell us about how all of those elements come together and how you were able to sort of weave this story with so many kind of ambitious participants, and pieces to it?
It's all the elements are there to drive the story. I like to call it emotional history. You have the orchestra is the core of it, and the entire program, whether you think of it as sort of Ken Burns or Hamilton,
Mhm.
the orchestra is playing almost the entire time, underscoring the story that I'm telling, or playing, Glenn Miller, uh, uh, all songs from the period, Aaron Copland. Music is interwoven to the story of these four figures. But it's not just the orchestra. There's the Broadway performers. We have an incredible cast coming down. Kate Rockwell, who was in Mean Girls, plays Lee Miller. Daniel Yearwood, who was in Hamilton, plays Salinger. Nicholas Rodriguez, who was in Company, a bunch of shows, is Hemingway. And then Shireen Ahmad plays Kappa. And she was recently My Fair Lady. So you put together the orchestra, you put together the singers. I'm narrating, telling the story, and interacting with them. And then there's some other elements. Occasionally we'll see some historic flags from the period and the event. And there's people too that we wherever we go, we find people that are related to the show. Ernest Hemingway's great-grandson appeared at the last one. Lee Miller's, Salinger's son. In Jacksonville, we have part of the show talks about the 688, all-female, all-black battalion in the war. We have family members from 688 in Jacksonville. Of course, we got a great military history. So all of these elements come together to create a different experience. So the bad news is I have a really hard time explaining this to people, but when they get there, they see something really different.
Yeah, and I think that they get it instantly. I alluded to this fact, John, but I mean, you come from a really storied Jacksonville family. Your mother was Joan Monsky, who founded Theater Works and the film festival here. Your father was the head of Universal Marion Company, which people who've lived here long enough will know occupied the former JEA building with the kind of the octagonal windows, and had a big role in Wall Street. Also funded the film, the producers. So your family's footprint in Jacksonville is substantial. And you, I guess, spent at least some of your childhood here, grew up here. Is that right?
Oh, I grew up here. I'm consider myself first and foremost a Jacksonville boy. My brother's here, Robert, and his wife Tess. My sister will be coming back for the show. This is I've been everywhere. I've been to I had the great honor of performing in the White House, the Boston Pops, New Orleans for the World War II Museum, Yale, NYU, Carnegie Hall. But there's nothing more important to me than coming back to Jacksonville. This is where my heart is. I lost both my parents over the last 2 years, and my brother and sister were saying, maybe we should do a memorial service. And then we turned around and said that mom and dad would want to do something for the community. So we hope the community enjoys this, and this is for Jacksonville.
Wow. Well, I know people are really looking forward to it. Kymberly Wolfson, I want to bring you into the conversation because there's actually some cross connections that you have with John Monsky, including the fact that Lewis Wolfson, who is related to you in some capacity, was the guy that founded Universal Marion Company, which was the company we were just talking about.
Right.
And you also are somewhat related to John.
Yes, I am. My grandmother is a Monsky, and actually, my grandmother, one of her sisters, and a first cousin of theirs, all Monskys, married 3 Wolfson brothers, one of them being Lou Wolfson.
Okay, and so there is a connection here, but the Women's Board is bringing in this performance not because of some familial connection, but
No.
because it really is something that speaks to the military community here in Jacksonville, and also just to kind of our appreciation of history.
Right. It kind of was this, perfect opportunity to be able to, thanks to John and his siblings and their generosity, bring this performance to Jacksonville, and their willingness to let us have this program be here as a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital. And we saw a lot of parallel in the story of the eyes of the world, and ultimately what is a message of hope in spite of, overwhelmingly challenging odds. And we see that in the Children's Hospital, which when we all come together, which is what we as a Women's Board have the goal of doing, raising funds and awareness for our Children's Hospital and spreading that message to the community. And when we all come together, we're able to support children and their families in their, darkest times and provide them with the hope that they will receive the very best medical care here in our community.
Sure, and accomplish great things as,
Mhm.
soldiers did in World War II, John. I wanted to ask you, I know that part of your inspiration and for the productions that you've done is this collection that you've had your entire life of flags, banners, flags, and that you began collecting them really as a young person. I think maybe your first acquisition was like a Teddy Roosevelt kerchief, but your mother played a role in encouraging that. Can you talk about, first of all, the collection that you have? It's enormous, and how that has contributed to the productions and their role in them.
Well, I grew up in Jacksonville in the shadow of the Vietnam War. I was on the young side of it, but it was still there. And the space program. And we had our share of flags, important flags. It was always important to me, being a historian. And when I was in college, I called up my dad and said, I think I want to stay here and be a history professor. There was a pause at the end of the phone. He said, you'll starve. I went to be a historian. I went to be a lawyer, but along the way, I never gave up history. And one of the ways I stayed in connection with it, like many Americans, and sure many of your listeners, I decided to collect something in historical space. And for me, flags were the attraction. And I've raised 4 kids, and every Flag Day, they bring over their friends and their friends' parents and people that we were close to, and I'd talk about one of the flags. And this whole thing emerged out of that tradition on Flag Day of telling these stories. I never dreamed it'd end up at Carnegie Hall, be 2-hour productions with 60-piece orchestras and 4 Broadway singers. But that's how I started it. So the kids said, "Oh, what did we encourage? That was a big mistake." But that's how it all came about.
And the reason that these flags, help tell a story is because you have found the story of these flags, right? They're not just um, an item or a banner. You actually track down where they've been, where they were flown. You have photographs of some of them when they were, in action, essentially, when soldiers were flying them going into battle.
Yeah, I've always thought about a period of history that I wanted to study, the Vietnam War or the space program, and then gone out and sought the flags. So this particular production that you'll see in Jacksonville on September 30th starts with a flag that came in on a landing craft, just like you see in Saving Private Ryan. There's larger flags that preserve. The smaller flags from the small boats are almost impossible to find. So I started looking at that particular flag. We came into Omaha in Utah. This one came into Utah. And on that boat, or a boat nearby, was an intelligence officer. It turns out his name is J.D. Salinger, and that's where this story starts. And I think after you see this production, you'll never read Catcher in the Rye the same way.
Mm. The cross connections that you uncovered are really remarkable. I mean, you mentioned Ernest Hemingway, but there is also Pablo Picasso is a figure in this. Marlene Dietrich is a figure in this. You mentioned J.D. Salinger. How those are new stories to, I think, certainly to me, probably to a lot of people. Those must have been really special discoveries to make in the work that you've done as a historian.
Well, as I turned every page, I was like, wow, I think we know of these figures as separate, discrete, famous people, but the fact that they were all in this big chill experience is amazing. And, Salinger nobody's heard of him. He's this kid that shows up on the beach. He's a 25-year-old intelligence officer. He's writing short stories, sending them home, and then in August, he realizes Hemingway is embedded in the 4th Division, and they run into each other. And part of the story starts from there. But in the same circle is Lee Miller, and she's taking her pictures. And her family gave me access to 6,000 of her pictures. You're going to see a lot of them in this show, blasted on the screen, and you don't normally see them that large. And then Lee Miller, who's friends with Hemingway, she's also friends with Robert Capa, who takes the greatest pictures, most critics would say, of the war, which are what Saving Private Ryan is based on. And with the permission of his estate, and you will see those on a mega-sized screen, which you don't normally get to see. And that's what was used for Saving Private Ryan. Those core pictures are the closest pictures of the Omaha beach that we have.
Wow.
And Hemingway's story of coming into that beach is chilling. And you'll hear his voice and his words about coming into that beach. So for me, turning every page around these 4 figures was like a bit of time travel. And it's so fun to be able to share it with my friends in Jacksonville.
So for folks who've been watching our live stream, we've shown some of these images and shown a little bit of the production, but I'd like to just play some with audio so people can get a sense of how it sounds as well.
London, May 1944. The war correspondents are getting ready, and Ernest Hemingway, reporting for Collier's magazine, arrives on the scene. He's one of the most famous authors in the world, and he hates fascism.
For many years, you heard American people speak who admired Mussolini because he made the trains run on time in Italy. It never seemed to occur to them that we made the trains run on time in America without fascism.
Hemingway knows war. He was seriously injured, serving in the Red Cross in World War I, bringing chocolates and cheese to the front line.
So that's just a little sample of what people are going to see, Kimberly. I know that this is a pretty, epic event to take place with all of these moving parts. Um, First of all, are there tickets still available? Are people able to attend?
There are tickets still available.
Okay.
We would encourage people to get them sooner rather than later. We're anticipating a full house. Tickets are available on the Women's Board's website, which is womensboardwch.com. And if you go to the Our Events tab, you'll find the Eyes of the World there.
Yeah. And John, I know that this is a bit of a homecoming. There's some personal stuff in this performance as well. I wonder if you could just briefly tell us, you've got a bronze star that you present during this performance that belonged to a family member.
Yeah, I had Leroy Monsky was, believe it or not, captain of the Alabama football team in 1937. And instead of going to the pros, he went to war. And you'll hear some of that story. I grew up all my life knowing he was a football hero. I had no conception of what he did during the war, but we will intersect with that when we're intersecting with Patton in Italy. And then, there's another Jacksonville figure that shows up that many people knew and loved. Hal Baumgarten landed on Omaha Beach, and I was working on the production. My dad said, "Don't you remember meeting Hal Baumgarten?" I was 6 years old. He walked me across the street to my next door neighbor, said, "You're going to meet a real hero, a war hero." And that was Dr. Hal Baumgarten, who came to Jacksonville Beach after the war. He took 4 bullets on Omaha Beach. The last one hit him in the jaw and finally took him down. But his widow, Rita, I'm hoping will be at the show. So there's a lot of connections. But for my family, it's meaningful.
Kymberly Wolfson, John Monsky, thanks so much for being here.